Hello everybody, today I'm going to show you how to recreate this landscape with gouache and colored pencils. Before we get started, I wanted to mention again that I have a course about gouache. It's called the Gouache Course Extended, and you will learn everything there is to know about gouache in there. All of the techniques, specific tutorials, whatever you can think of. And I decided, since it's Easter now, to do another sale, and I'm gonna offer the first 50 people 50% off. So this is a really good deal. If you missed the early bird offer, then this is your chance now. And the doors are still open till April 21st. So until then, you can join. And if you click on the link, you will see the price, whether you get the 50% off or not. I assume that if you click on the link within that time, you have a good chance to get the 50% off. So check out the link in the description box below and learn everything about gouache. So today I wanted to do something inspired by these pencils. I got them from Staedtler, and this is not sponsored by them, but they did send me those upon my request because I think they look so much fun. They're pastel colors, and I wanted to do a gouache painting combination and inspired of these colored pencils, but you don't need those specific colored pencils in order to recreate this. And you can see here I started with this kind of beige tone or a very light brown tone, and I started with the little house that we have in our landscape, and I mixed all kinds of pastel colors. And don't be scared to use very light colors here, especially since gouache dries darker. If you have bright colors, they will dry darker, and if you have dark colors, they will dry lighter. So you will lose a little bit of the contrast, but that's what we want here. I wanted it to look very pastel and very bright, so I made sure that my colors were that and even a lighter shade that I wanted them to be, because once they're dry, again, they are a little bit darker. And I just started to map out where I want everything to go. And this landscape is pretty simple to recreate. It has a bunch of details in it, but I think this is very beginner friendly because it's just a bunch of different shapes. And you have this house here that you can add as many or as little details to as you want. You could also just do the main shape of the box and the roof. And I have this little hill landscape, and we have the sky. So here you can see I have this little squirrel, and it's coming out of the chimney, and it's kind of going and mixing into the clouds. So all of the stuff in the sky is somewhat connected, and we have this sunset theme. I wanted it to look very fantastical and surreal, and I've done a bunch of these things in the past. I've done exactly the same theme of this painting before, but in a very different style. So I wanted to revisit it, and I'm much happier with this version. So whenever you have a really cool idea and it doesn't really turn out 100% the way you want it to be, then try it again and try it in a different way, and you might like it then, because that's what happened here. And I'm sure I'm gonna do this theme again at one point because I just think it's so fun. I don't know why. I love that this is coming out of the chimney and it's somewhat connected to the clouds and the sky, and you will see what I mean. And you can see now I'm mixing this kind of orange tone, and this one dried a lot darker than it was here. So really be aware of this. I think on the palette it looks much brighter, but honestly I didn't mind in this case because I wanted a little bit of contrast anyways. With gouache, it's always kind of finding out how much contrast do I want. And with this piece especially, we don't have a lot of it because I decided to go for the pastel colors. But some of the colors are not completely pastel, because if you do that and you exclusively use pastel colors, it will not have any contrast, and you're gonna have to add some kind of line art or something in order to make it pop, which I'm gonna do a little bit of later, but I didn't want this to be too heavy on the black line art, so I made sure that I had at least somewhat of contrast. You can see one of the hills is a very darker green. It's not completely dark, but it's a little bit darker, so we have a little bit of the contrast. And also with this purple shade here, it's also a little bit darker. So when I say pastel, I don't mean exclusively pastel, but you can do this in any colors that you want, obviously. So if you want to change up the colors completely, then go ahead and do that. I always love to see your versions of my paintings on Instagram, whether you recreated the way that I did it or you kind of take it and make it your own and kind of change it around. I always love to see your interpretations and what you learn. So if you repaint this, then tag me on Instagram at Visual Mind Art. And it might take me a while to see your post and to respond to it, but every once in a while I sit down and look at all of the creations that you tagged me on and I see it. So at one point I'm gonna see it, but it might take a little bit. So here you can see I started with the sun, and I loved painting the sun like this with these kind of rays around it, but kind of circles around it. So you can see here what I'm doing. I used different colors and I made sure that the sun itself was a pretty bright color, and then like a rainbow basically I'm going outwards and changing my colors a little bit. And you can do that in so many ways, and I've done this before. You can do it in a clean look like I've done here, or you can just do your strokes very messily. That can also look really cool. And yeah, you can see I'm doing more of these circles to kind of determine where one of them ends and another one begins. I don't know if you've heard that, but my cat just started screaming outside the door, so I had to lock him in another room. So where did we leave everything off? I think I was just rambling on and on about the sun. You can see that I'm doing a lot of swirls and I'm painting the clouds now. And I really want to experiment with this kind of style more and doing more skies. I think this is so fun, and I love the way that the swirls all connect, and I'm pretty proud of the idea that it connects with the clouds. I don't know how original that is, but I'm happy with how it looked in the end. You can see that I kind of kept a cohesive color palette, so I only used pink, purple tones and blue tones and a little bit of orange in the sky, and I used my green tones in the foreground. So I really tried to make sure that I don't go completely overboard with the colors, because this can easily look too much if you're doing this. So if you recreate something like this, make sure you somewhat have a color palette. I mean, I didn't completely stuck to specific shades, but I made sure that I'm somewhat in the same color range, and I'm spreading my colors around a little bit. So you can see I'm going back and forth, painting on the left side, painting on the right side, and just making sure that I have the specific pink tone in different areas and the specific blue tone in different areas, so I don't have to later on go back and paint with this shade again, because I have the tendency to mix my colors in. As you can see here, I mix different colors in and make different shades of them, so I don't have the color anymore later on. So you kind of have to figure out how to deal with this. I mean, ideally you would have all of your colors on your palette and don't mix them in, but I'm a rebel and I kind of do whatever I want when I'm painting, and I don't always think about the future when I'm doing that. So you can see here that I'm covering pretty much the entire page now. We're on to having filled it all, and that was my main goal for the start. And you can leave it off here if you like the way that it looks. I decided I wanted to add a little bit something, and since I got inspired by the colored pencils, I wanted to add them as well. And here you have to be a little bit careful because sometimes colored pencils can scratch off the gouache. So it's not a perfect mixture, but it worked kind of well here. And honestly, I would recommend using softer colored pencils. I've never used Prismacolor colored pencils. I really want to try them at one point because I've heard that they are much softer than others. And so maybe that would be a good idea here. And the Staedtler colored pencils, as much as I love them, they're pretty hard. So you have to be very careful not to scratch your paint too much. I kind of scratched it with the river in the foreground. So I covered that up later. Again, you will see what I mean. But right now I'm adding details to our little house in the foreground. I'm doing some kind of line art. And I had to rub my pen on a paper, on a separate piece of paper in between so that it would keep on working. It's really hard to do line art on top of gouache. And I'm adding in a lot of these lines with the colored pencils with different colors. And I think that adds a lot of detail and a lot of fun. It makes it look a little bit more playful, if you ask me, and kind of makes it look like an illustration in a children's book or something like that. So I really like the way that that looks. And here you can see I covered up the lines because it scratched the paint. I think it doesn't pick up on camera much, but I didn't really like the way it looked. So I just went over it. And since it's water-soluble gouache, you can always later on go back in and do that. If you're using acrylic gouache, of course you can't, but you could paint over it. So you can see that I'm also adding details to the sky now, and I just followed the clouds and the swirls, gave everything a little bit of an outline, but I didn't do it everywhere, so I didn't want to go overboard with this. Just add a little bit more detail and make it look a little bit more interesting. And I think that it's so fun. I have to try this again, maybe with different mediums, maybe with watercolors and colored pencils, because those work really well together, and then you don't really have the problem with the scratching. So that could be an idea for the future. Maybe I will do that at one point. And yeah, I mostly used the darker colors from the set because since they are pastel colors, you can't see all of them very well on top of other colors, which is kind of obvious. So if you have any kind of colored pencils, they would also work. You don't have to have pastel colored pencils for this. But yeah, since I was already inspired by those, I wanted to use them. And I'm adding in even more line art now and kind of finishing that off. And I was struggling a little bit with this, so it took me a little bit of going back and forth to really add in as much line art as I wanted. And I was using this ballpoint pen from an upgrade box that I opened recently, and it works really well on top of acrylic gouache, but it didn't work as well on the water-soluble gouache, so I still don't know which pen to use on top of it, but because this is a ballpoint pen and apparently they are much better than fine liner pens, but I find that they struggle the same amount, so I still don't know what pen to use on top of gouache. So if you have any ideas what I can use, I'm open to suggestions. And then I added in the squiggles to the mountain in the background as well, so that this one wouldn't be so plain. I don't know, I kind of liked it plain more now looking back at it, but there is always a little something that bothers me in every single painting, so I'm kind of used to that by this point, and I'm just gonna focus on the parts that I love the most, which is the sky here. And I'm just finishing everything off and making sure that my line art looks somewhat okay, even though I was struggling with it a little bit. And again, if you want to get my gouache course where you can learn everything about gouache, then check out the link in the description box below. Make sure you get the offer from the sale and make sure you sign up before the doors close. And of course, if you buy the course, you will have access indefinitely. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did so, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!